Shuklambaradharam Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasanavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vighnopashantaye. Om Sinduraruna Vigraham Trinayanam Manikya Maulispuratharanayaka Shekharam Smitamukhi Mapina Vakshoruham Panibhyam Malipurna Chashakam Raktotpalam Bibhratim Sahumyam Ratnaghatassa Raktacharanam Dhyayet Param Ambikam. Om Dhyayen Nityam Mahesham Rajatagirinibham Charuchandravatansam Ratnakalpujvalangam Parashumrigavara Bhitihastam Prasannam Padmasinam Samantat Stutamamaraganaihi Vyaghrakritim Vasanam Vishwadyam Vishwabijam Nikhila Bhayaharam Panchavaktram Trinetram. Om Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnur Gurur Devo Maheshwarah Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shruti Smruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. So I thought we will conclude our discussion of Advaita Vedānta, the great gurus, and Hinduism with a few concluding remarks. So one thing that I alluded to in the earlier discussion was the point about how the great gurus are different from the following guides. So for instance, when we talk about Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna or Ramana, and definitely Swami Vivekananda followed Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and propagated them. But the point I was trying to emphasize is the difference in the level of anubhava of the original seer. So going back to the very first of the three great gurus, Adi Shankaracharya, see, one thing that is often taken out of context by people who are very diligent students of Advaita Vedanta, including this video that we saw by Swami Tadatmanandaji, is that definitely Sri Adi Shankaracharya is renowned for his great philosophical and intellectual works. A great scholar, a logician, and a philosopher. So an ability to write commentaries, translations, instructional manuals, and also present an analysis which shows various objections and then their resolution, so as to give the clarity to the intellectual mind of that aspirant in Advaita Vedanta. There is no doubt about this. He's an intellectual giant. But what is often missed by many people who are drawn to Advaita are the actually more important aspects, that he was a true mystic. This intellectual accomplishment that we see in his writings is not a product of simply training the mind and reading. It is a product of his direct experience of the divine. So through samadhi, he obtained, just as the rishis did, and just as modern guides can too, these insights. I have mentioned in the past how even in modern science, the insights of Kekule or the Watson-Crick, even at times, the writings of Einstein seem to indicate that the greatest work is intuitive. Ramanujan is a great example. He used to just have these visions and he would write them down. And it turned out that they could be proved. So these are not random visions. There is obviously a machinery that is well tuned, but there is some insight, some flash, right? This is missed. And so Shankara is a mystic because our time is so distant from his. And I told you about the difficulty of transcending space and time as long as one is thinking through the mind and the senses. So unless someone is also able to have the direct anubhava and communicate, as I mentioned to you in an earlier directly, then you begin to understand his mysticism. And from that mysticism also comes the bhakti. It is also the reason why he has composed so many beautiful stotrams, Kanakadhara stotram, and various other, Bhajagovindam, Dakshinamurti stotram, the Nirguna Manasa Puja, so many other. So it is very, very important that our modern instructions of Advaita clarify this point. He was a yogi, a tantric, a mystic, a one who had attained the heights of samadhi, and also an intellectual giant. Consequently, in fact, is what I would say. And that also makes it then clear why, as I said, the three great gurus are on this level, and it's difficult for sometimes the followers to adequately even express in words what their teachings are. Right? And modern so-called teachers on YouTube and others, they don't have the ability to recognize and distinguish between gurus and guides. This is a problem because it seems to me reflective of their anubhava itself or lack thereof. Right? So knowing that the great gurus experienced this self, Atma, Brahman, through soul self-effort, unaided by human influences, but the followers were influenced by these human gurus. Right? And already I mentioned to you that among the true seers, there were some like Ramana, who was a Muni, who did not even teach much. So then what is the importance of the life of the great gurus then? We see, almost a complaint in Swami Tadatmananja's video that, Ramana did not know Sanskrit, right? Ramakrishna was a priest in the temple, so presumably he knew some Sanskrit, but probably not a scholar, we don't know, right? But how important is this? And what is the importance of the life of the great guru? This is unfortunately not recognized by these modern teachers of Advaita. The significance of the great gurus is the very life they lived. It's not always the formal teaching they wrote down, right? To be in their presence would, of course, have been remarkably transformative. But even if one does not have the same spatio-temporal location with them, Let me explain to you what is their legacy. Okay. Let us take Ramakrishna particularly. What is the true legacy? You see, there is no other saint, either in our tradition or forget other traditions, who has shown that first he experienced God through Kali, goddess Kali, through devotion. He then experienced through following the path of the followers of Jesus Christ. Then he said this leads to the same place. He then went through the path of Islam and showed that it leads to the same place. This is very important. It doesn't matter whether he wrote any book at all. This is the colossal ignorance of these kind of videos on Advaita, purporting to be teaching Advaita Vedanta, when they don't see the point at all. The point is, he has shown you this is possible. Now, what is the advantage? So essentially, he has shown you that Hinduism subsumes all other religions. Because starting in this path, I can follow every other path. But nobody from the other paths has followed and reached the same point. It's a very significant example he has shown. Tomorrow, if a parent encounters a child and the child comes and asks, why should I not follow Christianity? Why should I not follow Islam? The parent can turn and say, my dear child, there was a saint, and his name was Sri Ramakrishna. And he was a devotee in the Hindu path. And he attained God. And he showed that by following the other paths also, we attain the same God. No other person in those paths has shown the same thing. So therefore, you are best off sticking with this tradition. Yes or no? You can answer that. This is his significance. And so, saying something about prakriyas is revealing the ignorance and lack of anubhava and non-understanding, because this will only come when one has the dharma mega samadhi, the direct experience. So, and as I mentioned to you, the challenge is, either one has to be like the rishis, where you have the um, samadhi experience, and through that, the life of the householder is open to them, which was the status of the great rishis. Or if one is at like Shankara, then one should have the yogic power of parakaya pravesha and experience that. Then you can come and talk. Absent both of those, it is very, very difficult for a Swami to guide a householder in today's world without the direct experience. They don't know. It's quite simply. And so when they come back to guide, their expertise is limited to the learning of the texts. This is important. And so you will get a mukhwas for bhojan or a pan, right? And in this context, again, as I said, it is foolish to not recognize the reason of Swami Vivekananda. On the other hand, what Swami Vivekananda did was, he was very active. He propagated the very vision of Ramakrishna and started these printing presses. He made the Upanishads accessible to a large number of Indians by translating also into the English language. So these are significant accomplishments. And he also showed in the same wisdom that Ramakrishna had, that the importance of all the paths, because Swami Vivekananda saw that, if we just keep saying that mukti, mukti, moksha, moksha, it is not going to uplift the youth of India. And that was necessary. It is still necessary, right? So more holistic approach. Now, also, when people talk about traditional versus non-traditional teachers, there is some discussion of this. And the main thing that I would say is that when you grow up in a socio-cultural milieu like in India, bhakti is sort of soaked into your life experience. It is not an artificial afterthought. So, true bhakti, as you know, it must be experienced. right? We cannot just talk about it, and we must practice it, right? So the moment we start something, immediately Shuklam Varadam will come out of your mouth, or Gananantva, some prayer to Ganesha. Be soaked in it. It does not have to be artificially contrived. And plus, if you've had the anubhava or the experience that comes from that prayer to Ganesha at the Mooladhar, etc., then you know that it is logical, right? So bhakti is very important. It has to be felt. When you listen to great singers like M.S. Subbulakshmi, and it is socio-cultural because it is there in the music. You know what I'm trying to say? So it is, you cannot study bhakti, I feel, so easily from outside. You know, you cannot approach this from another culture and say bhakti is devotion, and it's like, the devotional chanting of a rosary and draw an analogy. It doesn't work that way. It is very, very deeply soaked into the socio-cultural experience of being a Hindu growing up in India. Which is not to say that others cannot have bhakti. I'm not trying to say that. Yes, the feeling of bhakti is universal. There's no doubt about it, right? But Advaita Vedanta, and especially when you take the very bhakti stotrams of Sri Shankaracharya, those compositions, right? You take Achyutam, Keshavam, Ramanara. It is in a social context, right? You know the names. What does Achyuta mean? What does Keshava mean? It has the Puranic background, etc. So it cannot be, Advaita Vedanta, in my opinion, cannot be taught divorced from Hinduism. This is the main point. Now, we talked about also what is the notion of, what is the end result of this kind of anubhava, the direct experience, is that you will see this discrimination you can cultivate, that those teachers who have the direct experience, they are able to give examples from practical day-to-day life to explain Upanishadic concepts or Vedantic concepts. They are not just parroting the examples in the Upanishads. This is a very important difference. And one of the best examples of it is Ramakrishna. I've mentioned to you numerous things, how he would say, I give a very simple example. The word for water, jal, pani, is the same everywhere. Or he would explain, why are there so many different paths to God? He would say, just like the mother takes the fish and cooks it for his fry one day for one child, boiled in a curry for another child. So similarly, he would say the goddess gives different ways to approach her, right? Or his summary of the Gita is Tagi, Tagi. Right? So many. Um, this is the real product of direct experience. Is that the person can explain the most abstract concept in today's examples, not examples just parroted from the texts. And nowadays, a lot of people are impressed by those because they don't know the examples in the Upanishads. They have not read the Upanishads. So that the parrot looks very wise. But the parrot is a parrot. You see? So, and so then, an important question may arise. So, am I saying that people who are not born in India or who do not have the Hindu cultural experience, should they not teach these subjects? Okay. And this is a tricky question. I would say that ultimately, the teaching is a contract between the student and the teacher. Okay. So if as a student you find something of benefit, that is fine. There is no restriction on that, so to speak, right? And there are, as I mentioned to you, Swami Gyaneshwara Bharati, somebody born outside, not in India, but a different culture, who has had the genuine experience. It is definitely possible, right? But there has also been a lot of teaching and preaching without anubhava. For not just in these years, but 1300 years ago, Bhagavan Sri Shankaracharya composed Jatilo Mundi Lunchita Kesha Kashayambara Bahukrita Vesha Pashyannapi na Pashyati Mudo Yudara Nimittam Bahukrita Vesha. So, Jatila, that is the so-called ascetic-looking monk in monk garb with plucked out hair, or Mundi, bald, shaven head, with Kashayambara, saffron clothes, and different such adornments or guises, they are not seeing. Pashyanapi na pashyati. Meaning that they are seeing with the eyes but not seeing with the inner eye. Mudho, ignorant ones, without anubhava. Why? Hyudara nimittam, in order to satisfy the stomach. This is a fact. You cannot ignore it. If it was true 1300 years ago, you think it is less true now? It's probably 1300 times more true now, right? So this is a fact. So, and I mentioned to you already who is qualified to teach. We talked about the definition of guru and how it is in modern world, we have in academia. I mean, similarly, this you probably, people who have been in engineering will experience, and people who are householders will understand. Sometimes, the husband will have a degree in electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, and the wife will say, the breaker, something is out, can you fix it? And, it may not be something that the husband has experienced, because our formal education of engineering doesn't teach you how to fix things around the house. You may say, we have to call the plumber or the electrician. Right? So nowadays, the teaching of Advaita has become like that. Formally taught, but can't fix anything for the householder. Right? This is very sad, but it's true. So there is an importance of discrimination or viveka. Now, some points about the prakriyas that are made are okay, they're reasonable. There may be some misunderstanding in the sequence of the terms karma, bhakti, raj, jnana. We have talked about it many times in satsang. So you have a very clear idea. What is the purpose of karma? Chitta shuddhi, purifying the mind. It brings about a seva aspect. Bhakti has to be cultivated, because without upasana having been done, one cannot open the door. Krutopasaka is important, not akrutopasaka. And then, of course, Raj Yoga is very important in its own place. And then Jnana Yoga. Without Jnana Yoga, having any experience cannot be made sense of and will not be useful. So we understand these things. But perhaps directly criticizing is maybe pointless. And as I said, again, this emphasis for Sanskrit is well taken. As you know, I myself have greatly emphasized it. In our satsangs, we always read in the original Sanskrit for the very obvious reasons that I myself was inspired to read in the original, because I did not want the filter of a translation. And then when you have the anubhava, forget the filter of the translation, you get the direct insight downloaded. Even so, it is very important to read in the original, agreed. But for the gurus like Ramana, it was not necessary. Even though after his realization, he did have Veda chanting in the ashram every day. Right? So now it is good. I think aspirants should be encouraged to read in Sanskrit. But in closing, what I would say is that the quality of teachers that we get will be only as good as what the followers demand. And so this is a real challenge to the Hindu diaspora. Hindus living abroad, unless we practice, we read the originals, we steep ourselves, we don't give up our traditions and culture and the study of the texts in the original, we will not demand the quality of teacher that we need, that it deserves. So I would say, I would put the thing flatly at the feet of the student and the aspirant. You will get as good a teacher as you qualify for. And hopefully by posting this to the general public, it may inspire people and also guide them to sharpen the discrimination, the razor blade of discrimination, even in the very path, in the external world, in the empirical world, in the phenomenal world, to ascertain who is a genuine teacher, so that then the real discrimination begins. Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka, what is transient and what is eternal.